Good afternoon, everyone. I think perhaps Helen's still coming. We'll just get started and she can join us. Welcome to the Curriculum Subcommittee of the Public Schools of Brookline. It's October 24th, 2023. And we have approval. Can we just start with the approval of the minutes for June 27th? We missed those.
I'll move them.
Okay. And I'll second.
Is Helen online?
Oh, wait, there's only
There's just the two of us, so can we
just the two
start?
of us?
Natalie is on.
But,
Yeah.
but she's not on the
But she
committee.
wasn't on the committee at that time.
Oh,
You have 2/3.
we have 2/3. Yeah, we do 2 out of 3. That's right.
Yes.
Go wild here.
Are you looking for something, Stephen? Are we ready?
I just wanted to see if there's anyone else. I'm like, oh, please go ahead.
Well, so I seconded, and so your vote, Stephen?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. And for September 19th,
I'll move it
and I'll second it,
and I'll vote yes.
and I'll vote yes as well. Okay. So, Dr. Fortuna, are you ready to start in on, are you going to do the anti-bias material tools first?
Since we have, I was going to do it at the end of the meeting, but since we have guests here that I'm assuming that's why they're here, we will commence with that. I have a folder. Please. I don't know if I have enough for everybody, so as long as you say one, I can copy for you on the shelf too. I made one. Thank you.
I get teaching topics. I get the magazine.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
good stuff.
Let me just go make a couple more.
Okay, thank you, Dave.
This is Helen, Sarah, me. Great.
I just wanted to be a little mindful of this
Oh, yeah.
outside people. I think they pick us up, but it's always.
So I was going to give the committee a little bit of homework, which I decided to give you between this meeting and the next meeting where it comes to these materials, because there's quite a few things in here. But I thought what we could do is orient ourselves to what is in the folder and how they came about. There's actually a clearinghouse for anti-bias materials to find bias in curriculum. And based on different research reviews, literature reviews in the field, these were the ones that had come to the top. The first thing, or depending on where your text is, I'll hold them up. This document here is from Teaching Tolerance, who now has a new name, which is
Learning for Justice.
Learning for Justice, thank you. Learning for Justice. And these are different teaching strategies and classroom practices that help with anti-bias education. Use of things like neighborhood explorations, explicit anti-bullying or community building curricula, a classroom audit. So those are all, those are a sample of the things that are listed in this document. Along with that document, we have from the Anti-Defamation League, creating an anti-bias learning environment, which really helps you assess yourself. Oh, no, wrong document, Jody. Oh, yes, no, right one. Really helps you assess yourself and assess your school for instance of bias. So that is in this folder as well. It also gives us 11 tips of what we should be looking at. Many of those things are also mirrored in more detail in the
Make an extra
practice for anti-bias education in the Teaching Tolerance and Learning for Justice materials. Then we actually went international. Nova Scotia has a highly recommended bias evaluation instrument, which is included in here. And then the Washington models for the evaluation of bias in content and instruction materials. This one is actually one of my favorites because if you flip to I'm getting these confused in my head now. I'm sorry. I've looked at them all. This one has all the elements that a review should contain, including gender, sexual orientation, gender expression identity, family structure, body shape and size, race, religion, physical disability, native language, culture, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, age, occupation, and geographic setting. And this is what schools in Washington State are required to use to assess all of their curriculum materials. And then my favorite one is the Midwest and Plains Equity Assistance Center from 2017. And the reason I like this one is because it actually has the research cited under each of the areas that it looks for. And it looks at the standards as well to make sure that our actual teaching standards are not biased towards a certain group of individuals. So what I like school committee to do is, or what I'd like us to do as a team, is to review these materials and then come back with recommendations for something that we can use. We don't have a formalized process for examining our own curriculum materials and standards for bias. And this is something that's really important to me both personally and I think to our organization, that this is something that we actually undergo, especially as we're considering new curricular adoptions in different areas. So
Kind of, if you could,
yes,
Jody, just kind of, so just pick one.
yes,
Yep. Let's pretend we're using it.
all right,
Okay,
awesome.
just so I have a sense of what it is, what we're going to be asking. Who are we asking? Our teachers to do this?
Our teachers or any committees, curriculum coordinators, any committee structure that chooses new curricular materials for us.
So we're looking at a new
A new ELA curriculum,
ELA curriculum, okay.
okay,
Okay.
which is something that we hopefully will be doing more recently, fairly soon. So assessing bias and standards in curriculum materials. Let's start with that one.
I brought candies.
Thank you.
A way of asking forgiveness.
You are completely forgiven.
I'm sorry, I was at a Pierce meeting downstairs.
So if we look at the first indicator here, we're looking at the standards. Do our standards build consciousness? Do they cultivate an understanding of how knowledge is construed and how that knowledge is the medium through which society defines itself? And then, does it support our students, which we want our students to be critical thinkers? Does it support our students to understand, investigate, determine how the implicit cultural assumptions, frames of reference, perspectives, and biases within a discipline influence the way in which knowledge is constructed within it? And then, do students work together in collaborative process with diverse people in knowledge construction to create a new understanding or knowledge that would exceed something that wasn't known already? And when I think of this, I think of really, are we giving our students materials and allowing them to be critical thinkers about the materials that they're receiving, and so that they are able to investigate for themselves implicit cultural assumptions that are being made in the materials, what frames of reference the author might have used, what perspectives and biases within the discipline. So say they're reading a newspaper article within the discipline of news writing, influences the way in which knowledge is constructed, and what we'd be asking people to do is provide a numerical grading from 0, strongly disagree, to 3, strongly agree. And then why I like this one is it then asks the reviewer to provide a rationale or an explanation of the evidence that they have, and then to give a recommendation or a consideration of what we should think of. So, for example, if the article is skewed towards one side of an argument, left or right of an argument, what suggestion could we make for either another resource or a teaching point that when we use the curriculum, it's what you do with it and the teaching and the instruction. So what would that be for those teachers that we're asking teachers to do when they get to this particular unit or lesson around that?
So I'm a little overwhelmed.
Yes, it's overwhelming.
Does that feel about right? So I'm getting,
I had one thing for you.
yeah.
When I read a rubric like this, what I look for is, instead of it making me feel like I can pat myself on the back because I'm attaining everything, is it a good guide for leveling up, right? So if you're not going to be strongly agree for every category, does this help you get the plan for how you get to a higher level? It's one way of looking at it.
Okay.
And
Can I?
yeah,
So can I just take yet another step back?
you go ahead.
So what problem are we solving here right now? Are we looking to preemptively root out bias from incoming curricula that we might buy?
Yes.
Okay, so this doesn't have to do with existing curricula that we are already implementing. We
No.
wouldn't apply this.
No.
Wouldn't incoming curricula already have its own instruments that we would use to evaluate it, or would we not?
It doesn't always.
It doesn't always. I'm like,
We'd like to think that it does, but it doesn't. And I think if we're applying an equal lens to everything that is being developed, that piece is
Okay.
critical.
So these are tools that we're looking at so that we can apply the same lens to, sorry that I need to do this.
No, this is great. Thank
That we apply the same lens to all the curricula that would come in henceforth,
you. Mhm.
so that we could look in a standardized way to make sure that we're not picking up biased curricula.
Correct.
Okay, sorry, thank you.
and in addition, that we could change some things to make it better.
Correct.
And so,
Or,
yeah, go ahead.
or to be able to possibly use it, but know what it's doing so that it's an example to show to kids
Yes.
what bias is.
We don't often do that, right? We don't often think about what is that counter teaching point to counteract bias.
Important.
Because there is implicit bias in many of the things that are there. And what my hope is that we'll start to uncover those implicit biases that are there and be more mindful in our teaching of what's the next step that we can take to make this better.
So this is like a super structural, just linking this to the recent conversation
Yes.
on Israel and Gaza. This is not like a direct re-resourcing of anything. This is like a super step back, a structural look of how we respond to supporting teachers. This is making sure that the structure of how we work with curricula has a lens that we use. Okay. But it's not dealing with like the micro problem of how do we deal with, I'm just putting parameters on this conversation. But when an incident arises as it did this month,
Right.
how do we provide additional resources that teachers may need to teach a specific event? That's not this conversation. This
Right.
conversation is more a structural conversation that how to overall prepare teachers so that they're not reaffirming bias.
Yes, in an ideal
Okay.
world, though this is a rather lengthy process, we would have taken this and applied it to the resources before we sent out because they were teaching resources.
Okay.
So in an ideal world, that would have happened.
Would have been it.
We realized that we didn't vet
Oh,
that
so
through
it's more
any
than-
lens.
So this is a process going forward.
Yes,
I see.
Yeah.
That's great.
and what it may result in is us pausing, right? So as I'm being reflective about what happened, we were in such a rush to get something out, to get some statement out, that we didn't fully vet the materials that we included with it.
Mhm.
What this will do automatically is slow us down to make sure that we are vetting those materials. And that may feel unsatisfying to some, but that's the hope.
Slow and sure, but who's,
So it's not just curricula, it's also content and resources.
Correct.
And it's a checklist that has to be checked off
Yeah.
before anything is sent
by
out
whom?
by OTL.
Who's responsible? for that?
So, for those resources that we sent out most recently in that example, that would be senior leadership and OTL would use this process.
Would that include you guys too?
I didn't see it.
Include,
Natalie and Claire have their hand raised.
yes, that gave him a shout, yes.
Jody says
Yeah,
OTL.
obvious, yeah. That's,
That's what I meant.
yes. So it would include Gabe and Michelle, Dr. Guillory,
Okay.
Claire Galloway Jones, Lisa O'Connell, and to the extent that she felt that she could be involved at that point, Susan Givens as well, that's senior leadership.
So we have some questions.
Oh, I can pause
Yeah.
unless I talk the better.
Natalie has a question.
Natalia, you want to go ahead?
I'm actually just going to walk in because I don't have the materials. I don't think they were emailed to us, so I have to come in to pick them up. So I'll come and stay, and then I'll get back on hybrid. So I'll be up in 2 minutes, and I'll ask then. Because the folder that you distributed, you have it emailed to us, right?
I have not, Natalia.
Okay, I'll come up
Large.
now. Okay, bye.
Also Claire, has her hand.
Yeah, thank you.
We have to work it out.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, no, I meant
Candy.
the candy.
Claire, do you want to ask your question as well?
Actually, it was just more of a statement. It's kind of reiterating what Jody indicated, that this process is really going to help us to kind of prevent what happened earlier. And that in retrospect, had we had a tool like this would have been really helpful. But also as we think about, as we decide to unpack curriculum in the various areas, this is a really amazing tool that will help us to really look at what curriculum we want to purchase. Is it really something that makes sense for our district? Does it align with our core beliefs and what we want to put forward? I think this tool will really help us stay on track. I really like the fact that it has the rationale piece, because people have to be thoughtful. You can't just say, you strongly disagree or you strongly agree without having something substantial that goes along with it, some reasoning piece that goes along with it. So thank you.
So I can envision that when you send out resources or buy a curriculum, that central office, our folks here will do some vetting for this. But I can also imagine if you were a classroom teacher and you were getting materials from elsewhere, let's say over just what happened recently, that you would also kind of be expected to do, I don't know if you could do all of this or if there's a quick list. There should be some vetting from the teacher, especially if you're doing other resources.
Yes.
So would that be, but we would.
Yeah, I think that's really a good point about another way that these could be used. I was thinking more macro level,
Yeah.
But I like that idea as well, Susan.
Well, it's a lot of work for the teacher,
It is.
But
and
it's mostly if something brings up red flag.
that's right.
Yeah.
So that's what I think, that, kind of a checklist of red flags or.
Exactly.
Right. So
I mean, for example, when we're teaching our trout unit in third grade, we probably wouldn't go through this extensive of a
Right.
process to unpack the trout unit. However, if we were teaching something in social studies or in ELA that could have explicit or implicit bias in it, this could be something that teachers could use as well.
And the bias isn't just in the materials, it's kind of in the interpretation of it. So I'm not sure how we get to that. Maybe that's.
So
another-
what are you saying?
I'm saying that you and I can read the same article and come up with different teaching points because of our own biases. I mean, that's what we're talking when we talk about our biases, right? And so it isn't just about training about this checklist. It's a training of how do you wear that lens and what should we be thinking about?
Well, this isn't being proposed as anything more than like a just-in-time vetting process, right? This isn't substituting for anti-bias training.
No,
This
no,
is just a tool.
right. But I would think somehow we could use them together or they should.
Well, I'm thinking if we start by always at the level of self, and so now I'm going to send you back into the ADL document. If we go back into that checklist, that assessing yourself, that really gets to, have you done your homework on this? Have you looked at the background resources? Have you had any professional development on these complex topics that you could be sharing with children? What actions have you taken specifically to dispel any of those stereotyping misconceptions that have happened? So I think, using some of these in conjunction with each other is important, but it is not intended. Thank you, Stephen, for clarifying that. It's not intended to really replace any anti-bias training that we would do with teachers. It's really much more of a way to vet just-in-time resources and any new curriculum that we're bringing in.
And Jody, I think one thing also that comes to mind when you lay these on top of each other, that it helps you focus in on your purpose for why you're identifying the material to begin with and what you want to do with it versus just saying I need a material in time and checking to make sure that it's anti-biased. In addition, why am I identifying materials to begin with and what's my purpose?
Right.
Suzanne Claire's hand is raised after Natalie. Claire.
Oh, okay. So just a minute, Claire, let's have Natalie go in.
Yeah, sorry, my comment before was sort of following up on Stephen's. Like, when we were listening to the foreign language, you remember one of the teachers made a really compelling case about how she would talk about Spanish and try to break biases around like with photographs. Like, I actually think this is really useful, but I think for a lot of our materials, I don't actually think right now just around this crisis is really like, but how do we, but for me, this would be like a real implementation, like a real in-depth, like when we did the middle school review, like I wasn't part of that, like was bias part of that review? Like every review we do has a bias component, right? So it would be nice for me to get caught up as to what exists and what doesn't exist, because for example, I would imagine social studies, as you said, history, more so than biology, or not biology, biology is very problematic. I meant fish biology, not biology. Like I'm kind of confused, and maybe I've missed kind of when, like I understand there was an incident that we're trying to respond to, but this is such a big conversation, and the school committee has been talking about, for example, why math scores are, inequitable for our Black students. Like I imagine there are some biases there in the math curriculum that are driving some of that. Like, are we having that fundamental conversation, or are we talking about a very simple checklist for resources that go out? So I just want to know what conversation we're having today and next week. And I don't think it's a 1 week thing, if it's the bigger picture. And are we going to bring in someone to help us through this, someone who can walk us through the different pros and cons? Like just being honest, like if you expect me to read these carefully and be able to come back and say this is a good one or this is a bad one, I don't know that I have the training to do that. But if somebody sat through and explained that, like I think I need someone to invest a little bit more into what the different options are, rather than just saying go home, read these. Next week we'll come back and decide on one. Like I hope that's not what you're saying.
No,
So-
no,
Okay.
no.
I just got a little nervous
No.
with the sort of, I'm giving you a week to.
No. And actually, I was thinking more curriculum sub, so a month. But we would also have Claire help facilitate a workshop on doing this, on using these as well
For the school.
for the school committee.
That would be
That
excellent.
would be good for the school.
Yeah.
I think that would be really good.
Yeah, I think so too.
And our next one isn't until the spring, but that's enough time to prepare it and have time to think about it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and for any just-in-time things right now, Claire's part of the team, so she would be helping us use it for just in time things.
Yeah.
And then we're not planning any new curricular adoptions that we'd be using it for until next year. So
And some of these have been used in that sense, not for curriculum, but for just in time. Like I
Yes.
know a lot of times, things get evaluated for a certain purpose.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry, I got. a little-
Claire, I believe, has something.
Hi there. I was just going to say that I think this is something that these are tools that can be used in collaboration with the work, that it becomes part of the process that we use each and every time that we're looking at curriculum. Anytime someone is starting either if we're trying to purchase curriculum for the entire district, or as we're working with coordinators and we're trying to just unpack what we have been doing, it becomes part of the protocol that we use. Very similar to if during our hiring processes, we are using a tool to make sure that we're using an anti-bias tool to recalibrate our thinking before we go into a process. So hopefully folks will start to think of this as part of the process of what we do, to kind of center ourselves before we start the work. And I am definitely happy to do professional development on going through all of the different pieces that have been presented today, but just hoping that we're starting to think that this is part of the work that we do on a regular basis, that we recalibrate, that we acknowledge that we have bias, and that we need to center ourselves before we go into an actual process.
And my hope would be, bringing it back up to the school committee level, my hope would be that if we're proposing a curricular purchase, that one of the first questions we're asked is, have you gone through this process with those materials? Because as Claire was saying, this should become a normal piece of how we do business here in Brookline. Last question.
Later. Yeah, hold for a second and let's just see where we are with this. We'll let the school committee go first and then we'll open this up a little bit. Is that okay?
Yes, that's great.
So did METCO go through, did METCO have a grant? They looked at some materials.
Yep, METCO did our social studies review last year. And that was an equity audit. And what New Teacher Center used for that was they really focused on the teaching that was happening, and they used the culturally responsive rubric that is put out by the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They didn't use a tool like this to really dive deeply into the materials. They looked more at how the materials were being used rather than the materials themselves.
So, Stephen?
Okay. So what are the targets in the strategic plan that are relevant here? Either the long-term targets or sorry, let me split this question into two. So it seems to me that there are two problems that we're discussing here. They're both equity problems. One is the nasty, persistent structural equity problem that we're constantly talking about, which is the achievement gaps that we're addressing in a number of ways. Some of it's PD, some of it's culture, and some of it is looking at reviewing curriculum through anti-bias lenses and making corrections. And that we're addressing that in part here, but that's not all of what we're talking about right now. We're also looking at these tools for just-in-time vetting processes for research content that you might be generating, producing, adapting, importing to deal with specific events that which you want to provide additional support or safety for teachers in specific moments, like we did in the past month.
Yeah.
Those seem to me to be macro and micro goals that are linked but not the same. So we can discuss this, but now there's an overall rubric for this, I think, which should be the equity goals of the strategic plan. So I want to be able to think of this in terms of the goals of the strategic plan and how we're advancing towards that. So can you help me with that?
I absolutely can. And what I just threw up there is one of the pieces that we want in our first goal in our strategic plan is an equitable, cohesive, and culturally relevant standards-based curriculum. And for the strategic plan, it's going to be ELA, math, science, and world language. that we're looking at
You can
specifically.
put this in full screen so people can see it because it's, yeah, I think that'll help to be, I mean, I can see it, but if I were to do it, I couldn't.
Yeah, it looks good
Oops.
online.
Oh, I like that picture.
We're gonna go back to the picture. We haven't talked about that yet. So this is actually our other piece of work today, but I don't want to, yes.
Well, just so you can mush it
I
together.
can wait on this.
You might want to wait just a minute in
Sure.
case we have some input on this, on the first topic.
Sure.
So will that be okay? You can bring it up again because it's on here. Okay. Other members of school committee, this member of this group? have
So
questions, comments?
we don't really need to, this is more informative than us having to do something about a school committee.
I would love to have school committee really understand this and.
Understand, absolutely, but
Yeah. No, it's more informative because this would be under our purview for actually utilizing it.
and you would be using all of these as appropriate. or-
As appropriate, I have a bias towards,
Really?
towards two of them. The ADL one and actually three of them. The ADL, the critical practices and the assessing bias in standards-based materials.
That's helpful.
And the reason that I have a bias towards this particular one is the research base that's cited in it, that it was founded on. I find that more helpful than what Nova Scotia had put out. But I wanted the committee to kind of see a range of materials that were out there so that you'd understand why these were ones that we were feeling a little bit more inclined towards using.
So I'm thinking if you want to pick the one you like the best and then we could respond to that, that's a possibility.
That'd be great.
Would that be helpful?
Yes, and I might Frankenstein a couple of them together.
Right.
Right, but for, to sort of define that, I wanted to say that, we have one that does standards, and we have two that are rubrics, so that's like evaluating, right? And a checklist, of course, is very different than a rubric. So a
Yes.
checklist, you'd be looking at the overall kind of program, and are you reaching far enough, right? Whereas with a rubric, you're evaluating on something and giving it the grade, and the standards, like you could maybe want to use each of these together because they serve different purposes.
Correct.
On these assessing things, it has more to do with climate, it seems, in the
Is that the
classroom.
ADL document?
Yes.
Yes.
Am I correct?
Yep, you're correct. It's more
It would
personal.
be interesting at some point when people don't have time. And they may not, just for schools to do that, or maybe they do.
They don't, but it could be something that we
You
can
know,
really do.
I mean, I know most of our schools have a dinner for all the different countries that people come from, bring their foods, those sorts of things. We have flags in some schools, we have, but it would, I think this would help people to think about it.
I would agree.
Okay, so for our guests here. As we were mentioning just slightly, so people probably did not hear, there has been some conversation about definition of anti-Semitism and some of the things that have gone on in just the last couple of weeks. And that's probably not something we are going to do here in this subcommittee. That is something that will probably go to policy subcommittee. I spoke to David about this, David Perlman, who's chair of the policy subcommittee. And he wants to take a look at our policies around bias, around bullying, around racism, all the isms, and to make sure that we have clear definitions so that we're all using the same common language. And so that will probably go to policy for that. And then what will happen is if that goes to policy and it comes to whole school committee and we vote on new policy and on definitions, then we will work from that. This subcommittee would then work with those policies in mind. So it just, I'm not trying to avoid some of that. I'm trying to give you the framework that we all, in subcommittees, we all kind of have our little areas to work on. And then we bring it to the whole committee and then we give it to each other. And then we do our work on curriculum based on what policy says, or based on what the budget says we can do, or based on capital. Same idea, right?
Thank you. To Stephen's point before on those two subjects that these materials or tools or new mechanisms should be able to address. Are we looking, for example, what just happened with their exporting materials that we found very problematic? We already discussed this, but a tool like this or a tool like that been able to better address it.
Yes.
So I would recommend to highly check this again because I think it actually will cause that biases one more time. The try have balanced views, especially when talking about terrorism and anti-Semitism. That's what leading sometimes, unfortunately, we just experience. So especially just once through this, there are areas when you need to be able to refer to bad or good. Again, in alignment with US policies in the US public schools, so obviously there is an already definition for anti-Semitism. There's already definition for terror organization. So just to make sure that we're not mixing the two and by actually trying to do good, we are following the same, maybe our own biases or mistakes. And then also for this one, assessing bias in standards and curriculum materials, 7.2, 7.3, this refers to people of color, disabilities, LGBTQ people, and also non-white mathematicians, writers, artists, and others. It would be also good to understand, do we see different religious or Semitic part of that or not? I'm not sure we have clarity on that. And so just again, to make sure as we're looking through different lenses.
Yeah.
Which of the documents were you referencing?
Reference to the Washington models for the evaluation of bias content and assessing bias in standards and curriculum materials.
Washington State.
Washington State.
Okay.
And that does have- that does have all of this.
We aren't necessarily
Yes,
using, we're not, what I just heard Jody saying is that we're not talking about using either the Nova Scotia one or the Washington.
We are looking at all four, so it's good to hear.
It's good to get input about
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Oh, absolutely.
thank you. Did
I have a
you-
little question because there is moral stand that we should take here, and I'm just curious if the town of Brooklyn is different from the moral stand of the United States. Do we need a jurisdictional pyramid and going up to some other committee to make sure that we understand the language? Is the language not clear? Do we have misunderstanding of what anti-Semitism is described by the US government in the official?
No, so when policy takes a look at that, they will, Scott gave us some references to use and we'll share those. And we'll go to some other resources as well.
So,
Just
you know, one thing that might not be clear in the United States as opposed to Israel and the type of education system there, everything is top down in Israel. You have the department, whatever it is of education, they put out the curriculum, they decide everything. Here, it wasn't until recently, it came all from school committee and stayed within the town. We don't, now the state is a little more with the standards involved, but for the most part, we decide here what's taught, our staff decides, it's not top
Those
down.
states are united under the United States. And
Shared
They have shared
the
values,
foundation level values.
right? We have the all believers.
I think there's a pretty robust debate about definitions of anti-Semitism and other, I mean, I've seen a number of definitions of it.
There are many definitions.
Yeah, and I think the conversation right now is, do we want to endorse one of those definitions? And that's what the chair of the school committee wants to take up the policy. But I think it's a good question.
Sure, thanks. I appreciate you wouldn't necessarily make time for public comment, but I particularly, well, I think it's been a fabulous discussion, first of all. And these materials look like they're a very promising rubric, have to be studied. Susan was saying, I thought a very good point, Dr. Pachuta was acknowledging that as this is used, teachers are teaching. And teachers are using material, they're bringing in their own materials, following hopefully generally the curriculum, but I really, to the extent there is some kind of mechanism for review, I really would like some system to be put in place on the departmental level, and the principal level, and on the teacher level to make sure that people know this is the expectation, that the materials that you're going to use should be vetted through this system. And I would like to see something be more at a departmental and at a school level, rather than just being a free-for-all for all teachers to bring in wherever they want, because then there are no standards, right? And that can get messy, and people can sometimes inadvertently get in trouble, sometimes advertently get into trouble. That's the kind of thing that I think these systems are in place to try to avoid, because we're a diverse school system. We want everybody to feel like they're in an environment where they're going to learn rather than going to debate and fight and be upset. To echo excellent comment here. Sorry about there are not in here. There's not a lot of ways. I mean, there's a system here, but that only goes so far. I don't know what the answer is to this, but there are. All right, so I'll make 2 points. One, on the balance, that's what I was going to say. You're teaching the Holocaust. Balance doesn't mean you teach Holocaust deniers, right? I mean, we're all shaking our heads here, but actually that's kind of an issue in Texas and Florida, right? So that's something we have to be very careful about. And so you can apply that problem to a lot of things, like ones that we're all here for. The other issue is that there are curriculum out there that view the need to talk about structural racism, which I personally believe is a real thing, in a way that that just makes very broad categories of people, and will say that Jewish people have power and privilege, and non-Jewish, non-Christian people do not. So somehow, because people throw around this Judeo-Christian thing, which I think is a terrible phrase, which for reasons we have to get into, if you're talking about power dynamics, then that gets into a very sticky conversation when you're talking about Jewish people, because it leads to anti-Semitic tropes, but at the same time, there is a rubric that a lot of people embrace that say that Jewish people are white people, and white people are part of the power dynamic that we need to be addressing when we're talking about systemic racism. And the problem I always have personally is I think that's a very good conversation to have about systems of power and how that has a real effect on people from marginalized communities. But a lot of the times the Jewish community is a major casualty of that discussion. And it played itself out very badly in California, and it's playing itself out very badly in other places. And if this rubric will keep that problem from coming to Brookline, I'm 1,000% behind it. But if this has kind of open on-ramps for where that stuff can sort of sneak in, that's why when I was talking before the meeting started about the intentionality of really thinking about anti-Semitism. And I think if you're going to do that, Islamophobia is a very important thing to be talking about, just as importantly. But they have different expressions, and they need to be thought about intentionally. And that's why when the policy group gets together and talks about a definition of anti-Semitism, this becomes a discussion that's not academic and really just at the school committee policy level. It gets really nitty-gritty expressions in the classroom. And it's a long, hard conversation, and I know that you're not prepared to have it today, but to the extent this rubric can be massaged as the Frankenstein is created, so that that conversation happens, so that divisive curricula don't find their way to Brookline under really nice language about breaking down like racism, homophobia, everything that we're against. It's a hard but important conversation that we really have to go in with our eyes wide open about. Because if we speak just in generalities, that kind of stuff, it comes into the classroom, even if it didn't come through the central office. And that's what I'd say.
Yes. Thank you for inviting us to join this discussion.
Could you just say your name?
Sure, my name is Mona. I'm a mother of two in the school system, one middle schooler and one high school. To piggyback on a couple of the comments and maybe add a few, I think it is very important to address anti-Semitism and to have a definition that is, widely accepted in the community. I think that's super important. And I agree that adding anti-Muslim bias and anti-Arab bias in the current discussion is extremely important, whether it's done in this committee or in a policy committee. And I know that there's a large community of people that feel very alienated by the whole discussion around anti-Semitism. And actually, there is a growing fear, especially with some doxing that's happening and some shutting down of opinion, especially in the high school, around anybody that feels anything other than sort of the mainstream thought right now in the community. And so I do think it's very important that these various definitions get put on the table for consideration, whether it's this committee or the policy subcommittee. So specifically also recognizing that it's not a Jewish Muslim thing, but it is a wider discussion around free thought. And so that gets to my second piece, which is creating safe and brave spaces for our kids to have discussions and to develop the socio-emotional tools that they need to have those discussions and not to be afraid of addressing various experiences, various perspectives. I have a lot of fear about what I'm seeing, especially again in the high school. I think K-8 is not feeling it as much, where you see people retreating into camps, and not having really critical and important discussions. And at this age, this is where they are developing these tools. And I think if we fast forward and look at society as a whole, unfortunately, we as adults are not modeling what we should be for our children. And I think that starts at this age. So I think the work that you're doing is so incredibly important because as we know also on college campuses, we're seeing a lot of that, right? Oversensitivity to debate. I mean, when we were in college, used to go hear different sides of debates and make up your own mind. And now between the way the news is generated in this country and then the way that we act as citizens in this country, I think it's really does our children a disservice. So I would love to see Brookline be a leader in really forging forward and, having spaces that are open to critical thinking and different ways of being. And just in the way that we would support, our LGBTQ students who, obviously are not the majority of the student body, but we create policies that ensure that they feel seen, that they feel safe, that they can be who they are in this community. And that's what we want for all of our students, including our Muslim students, including our Muslim American, Arab American students, but also our students of different ethnicities and backgrounds that may, have whatever opinion that they have. They should feel comfortable bringing that to anything. So I just wanted to bring that up. And lastly, sorry, to address another point and something that I've heard that has been experienced at the high school, I think Brookline has always been a leader in creativity in the classroom, and that sort of, maybe things have gotten more formalized over the decades, and that there's been pushback from teachers about that as well, because they want that creativity in their classroom and sort of free hand to be able to do things. And I think there's a lot of validity in that. And at the same time, there have been so many random ad hoc things that have happened in classrooms, addressing whether it's the conflict that just happened or 9/11 or other things that are in the news that are, controversial. and you all of a sudden have a physics teacher or a Spanish teacher or something that has nothing to do with, social studies, or someone who might be trained in these areas, addressing them and taking action around them, that with potentially a lot of implicit or explicit bias that can leave students feeling psychologically unsafe in the classroom. So I want us to address all of those issues, please, in this discussion.
Thank you.
Thank
you. I will say it is a goal. It's always been a mantra of Dr. Guillory, is that every student has an adult, that they feel safe, that they can go to, that we have safe spaces, we have affinity groups. So, if you know of a student who is not feeling that way, then I think we need to communicate that, because that really is a goal of ours.
But
Okay,
we raised it
we
like,
have-
like 2 weeks ago,
Yeah,
where they all
that's
like,
exactly what
and
we
the
did.
kids didn't go to school because of the
Well, that
way we address. So that's, again, I think it's,
that's not what we want.
yeah. So
To be very clear, we want all our students to feel at least one adult. They have one adult they can go to, hopefully more, but at least one. Doesn't have to be their classroom teacher. It could be a coach. It could be, a music teacher. It could be anyone, but they need at least one that they can feel safe
Can I
and
say
hopefully
something
more
in
than that.
fairness on this piece? I think having an adult is so important and so critical, but that is, that becomes a single outlet to communicate your fear or your discomfort. But I think it's the role of our school system to create an environment overall, an ethos
Oh, yeah.
that is
Yeah.
comfortable for everybody.
Not only-
Just really quickly, I think that is a minimum standard.
It's a minimum, yeah.
Right, it's a floor. And there is like supportive research on like that as a particular factor. And when we survey students for their social emotional learning, we actually ask them if they have an adult. We ask them to name that adult. So like that's a specific item in addition to kind of just a general feeling of safety.
And the purpose of the adult is to get the wraparound support. It's not for that person to solely do the support for the student.
Right.
So
Give them to direct them in ways that they can be helped. Natalie.
I just wanted to thank everybody who has spoken, and I think what I hear from Scott and also from Mona is this unintended consequences of a decision that you might take, and I heard that now. Scott is saying you may pick well-meaningly a program that opens up the possibility of, anti-Semitism is the one, and what Mona is saying, you might define anti-Semitism in a way that shuts down or is harmful. So I'm actually quite worried that any decision-making could have unintended consequences. So I want us to be very considered and be blunt about what those unintended consequences could be. And part of me feels like, since it's curriculum and policy, like we should probably get together and discuss this rather than having two separate conversations. Because it seems like the two, and then going back to sort of the broader system of schools and, are teachers equipped? But I am hopeful, and I don't know, I'm hopeful because I see our kids talking about LGBTQ issues in a really fluid and really inclusive way. And I wonder if there is some learning, like how do teachers, and maybe I'm wrong, and maybe I'm, and I have heard of bullying, so it's not like it doesn't exist. But is there a way that curriculum has been inclusive in another area where it could have been controversial? And I go back to when Janae spoke to us the last day, she sort of said, what has been missing, and going back to sort of the white supremacy thing, is like examples of white individuals who are part of the solution. Like that was, to me, like she made us name who was, so somehow I think there has to be some positives, and maybe it is what you're saying, Mona, creating environments where we're finding students, in our effort to protect our students, are we sort of preventing them from finding ways? I don't know, and I'm not an expert in this, but I'm now aware of these unintended consequences, and we can get this very wrong. And I think it's very climate right now is very polarized. So I don't actually know how we move forward in a way that satisfies the immediate. And it goes back to the micro versus the macro. We have such macro challenges. There are micro missteps. And I brought that up at the school committee meeting. I do think we need more conversation, and not to sort of have one conversation policy, one conversation here, and just be open about what we think the potential risks of any of the decisions that we take, including providing a formal definition. Like I know some people definitely want one and some people don't, and I don't know. I haven't been convinced yet that one definition will like if you give us like 8 definitions, I don't know how many sent Scott. I haven't seen them yet. But like, is that the plan?
So I said one.
Oh, you said, oh, okay. Okay. I'm not on policy, so I haven't seen
Yeah,
it.
it's well, it's the IHRA working definition of International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. There are other definitions that were created in response to that because that the IHRA does have examples that talk about anti-Semitic, things that could be anti-Semitic that relate to Israel. And so the other ones try to avoid some of that unpleasantness. But the IHRA definition, first of all, like I said, it's not meant to be codified because it's not rigid. It says, depending on the context, this could be anti-Semitic, and gives an example. It also explicitly says that criticism of Israel, as you would criticize any other country and government, is not anti-Semitic. It's the one definitive statement that does that. But it gives examples of where, if you're criticizing Israel in a way that no other country gets criticized, it could be, depending on who's speaking and what the context is, could be considered anti-Semitic, and it's based on the experience of Jewish people. And including as it gets expressed in violence or in microaggressions.
I think we should have the discussion about definitions of policies. I think we should have it in full.
Yeah,
it's going to be really interesting.
That's a fabulous.
I just wanted to say something in response to this conversation. First of all, I thought these were great comments. I really like the phrase safe and brave. I've been saying safe and supportive. I'm going to replace that with safe and brave. I think that's way more positive. I just, in my head, I'm limiting this conversation a bit in my head because the tool itself isn't going to accomplish that much. To me, it's a blunt tool. I know what you're saying. I'm sorry, I forgot his name. Betty. It's okay. I know that he's advocating, and you to a lesser extent, Scott, for something that's more norms based. That's able to enforce real norms. I mean, Vadi very strongly, Scott somewhat less strongly, but and Vadi's saying that constitutes leadership, and Mona is saying, and Natalia to some extent also is saying that there's a lot of gray area, and to do that is going to cause unintended consequences. And in this moment, I'm not weighing in except to say that this tool just isn't going to do much of that. It's only going to take a blunt instrument and avoid situations like what happened a couple of weeks ago. And it's also going to be, you can apply it to incoming curricula also. That's why my mind goes to slides like that, so we can see the entire portfolio of equity activities in PSB, so that we could see how are we tackling the big problems here, which to me remain differentials in academic performance, but also feelings of safety and bravery in the school context and the differentials there. Those to me are the problems. And this is the new tool that's being introduced in this context, which to me seems, thank you for this. This seems like a really good response to this. I'm embracing it completely. I'm appreciative that we have a chance to weigh in on it. But it also seems to me like, I feel like we're all really hankering for a big discussion, and I am too, on like all the things that we want to try to solve. But this seems like a small, blunt, possibly effective tool that's going to be added to our toolkit. But that slide seems to me to relate to what the toolkit can potentially contain. So that's my, I just want to let you know where I'm at in this discussion as well.
Let's kind of make that a segue. We'll have 2 more.
Okay, I just wanted to finish my thought.
Oh,
Good.
well, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that sounds great, Steve. I just wanted to end on, I want to recognize and uplift something that what I heard Natalia say at the school committee meeting that discussed this issue. And the one I'm promoting, I think, does this, but I'm very conscious of, I want a definition of anti-Semitism that for everything that you said about your children's concerns and fears and backlash against people who are Arab or perceived to be Arab, regardless of their religion, right? That that they are not erased or excluded or marginalized by any definition of anti-Semitism. I know the IHRA definition doesn't do that. I know it's been used in a way that does that, but that's true of everything. That bad people, if we respond all the time to what bad people might do with tools, we wouldn't use any tools, right? We have to be an example of how, what Brookline stands for. So what Brookline stands for is a room where Natalie and I can be fantastically in the same space and on the same wavelength and understand each other and appreciate each other and want the same for each other.
So let's go to Sarah, then Gabe, and then maybe we could transition kind of.
And I can hear what you're speaking about, Natalia, that this is a tool to evaluate something else that is maybe what is currently the different curricula in the different subjects. But it sounds like you're also kind of saying that you would like to see something that is a curricula that we have that goes through our K-12 years that's intentional and talking and teaching about anti-bias, right? So I think that we just had a conversation today about one piece, right? And then there's also that's different. And so our conversation was kind of intentionally limited today because it wasn't about what are the standards that we have for every student all the way through to have an anti-bias curriculum, right? And so we didn't get into that today.
I'm thinking about the framing a little bit because I think yeah, I know. But I think it's a transition in an interesting way. One of the things that's come up in a few different places, right, is this potential tension. I don't know if it is a tension between autonomy and unity, right? And we are historically not a district that says, here's 180 days of curriculum on day 5, you should be on lesson 5. And I think that has been a point of pride historically for this district, right? And the creativity, the array of options at a school like Brookline High, like the number of courses kids can take, that the course catalog is as thick as a college campus, and we talk about that with pride. And on issues that are controversial, that becomes tricky, right? And so one of the things we have not historically done as a system is define where there is more control and where there is more freedom, right? Where there is flexibility and creativity, and where we are like, actually, we really don't want you to be creative here. That's dangerous, right? And I think many of our teachers, right, and as many folks in the room know, my background is in social studies. I've spent a lot of time with our social studies coordinators in the last little while, helping them problem solve, right? And their teachers are sometimes really well-intentioned, running into trouble. And the amount of freedom that folks have on this particular topic and many other topics that are maybe unexpectedly controversial sometimes puts teachers out on a limb unexpectedly before they even realize, right? And so I think here's my handoff to Jody, right? Is one of the opportunities we have is to make some choices about where we choose to limit choice and where we might choose to keep choice expansive, right? And that certainly will not be easy. Right? I think one of the other pieces is different topics are controversial in different communities.
In different
communities. I mean, where I taught on the West Coast, and Japanese incarceration was much more controversial than it might be here. Because people had lived the experience differently on the West Coast than they live it here. We don't have to go down that road. That's it. I'll have coffee with you whenever you want, Helen. It's fascinating.
I mean, there's not like another side to it. Okay.
You might think, and yet different communities experience things differently, as we've already raised, right, on different topics. Right, the freedom with which our students discuss.
We have Armenians and Turks in Brookline.
The freedom with which our children discuss LGBTQ issues does not exist in every community, plain and simple, right? And so I think part of the challenge and part of the beauty of local control of schools is that we have to make some choices. And so.
Okay. Nice segue. Excuse me. So one of the things that I wanted to talk with this group about tonight was to get even more micro about the feedback that we received about the strategic plan, our workshop this week.
And I wanted to show you some of the things that I've been trying to work on in response to that feedback and have you tell me if I'm going in the right direction or if I'm totally taking myself down some route that wasn't intended.
So we're switching topics.
We're switching topics. We're switching to strategic planning.
It's a hybrid. And then is there any other materials or everything will be on the slide?
Everything will be on the slide, which I'll share with you, but I'll.
Sorry, I was responsible for child pickup at 5. Somebody else is doing it. No, but I still have to be at home.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
I'll be online.
We don't want to follow 51 AM.
Okay, I'll be online.
Going
there.
Right.
Yeah. You're sworn in?
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome to our team.
Thank you.
So here is that first goal that we saw with one slight modification. And that modification actually came from Helen suggesting that I look at the 2012 plan. So, which I've done. And that's the first phrase, increase achievement. Before we had very much an output type thing without what's its impact on students. And so we added the phrase increase achievement for students by establishing, implementing, and regularly assessing an equitable, cohesive, culturally relevant, consistent,
Clear down.
standards-based curriculum in ELA, math, science, and world language. It's okay, it's just consistent.
Sorry.
Using culturally responsive instruction. So this has equity and cultural responsiveness all kind of rolled into this large goal. We are a teaching and learning organization. So I guess this should be a pretty large and substantial goal. Another piece of feedback that I heard from the committee is that we established, I think I referred to it as year 0 at the meeting, but a foundational year, which would really be this year, this school year. And that the committee wanted to see our activities broken out into different years. So how would this goal and how would budgeting, what could we budget for year over year? So this is an attempt to do that. And what is front and center in year 1, year 2, and year 3 is to really complete an equity audit to diagnose the magnitude of the issues that we are facing with diversity, equity, and inclusion in the district. And Claire, I'm going to ask you to say a little bit more because we worked on this together, and I think it's important to have your voice here.
Sure. I think what's really important to understand is, prior to my arrival and Jody's arrival, I know she was here for part of the world language, is that, equity and has been part of all the curriculum reviews that have happened thus far. I know the MECO grant covered some of that work, but I think what we really need is a comprehensive equity audit that really is going to evaluate the district, the full spectrum of the district. I think that would be really important. I think what we're doing is we're pulling pieces together, again, noting some of the pieces that have come out in some of our the established curriculum reviews, but also looking at our panorama data and things like that. But we really need a comprehensive full equity audit to really get an idea of what's been happening, what's happening in the district, and then planning out year 2 and year 3 from that.
I'm going to show my ignorance.
Sure.
What does a complete equity audit mean?
So a complete equity audit will be, we're going to look at the academic pieces, we're going to look at SEL pieces, but it's really going to drill down. So when we're looking at the academic pieces, we will look at curriculum that's being used. So the tool that we were talking about, we would be essentially evaluating, are there any tools that have been in place prior to what we just talked about that really would help us really root out any bias in our curriculum that's available. Also looking at our instructional practices, we have a lot of data. We have our MCAS data, so we'll be using our MCAS data to kind of guide. We know that based on some of the data that we've had, access to advanced work class and things like that have come up. Academic achievement for our BIPOC students and our other marginalized groups have also come up, but we will be drilling down into that across the board.
Would it include also looking at extracurricular activities?
Oh, yes, extracurricular. We'll be looking at community and parent engagement, how engaged our parents are. I mean, we really want to make sure that we have a full family engagement happening within the district, and that might be happening in some areas, but not happening in others. So there would be focus groups. We'd be reaching out to our PTOs and other groups within the organization as well.
Okay, thank you.
So would this be a consultant that would come in? Does it be an outside?
Yes, it'll be an outside consultant that would come in.
And there are such people out there that will tackle this huge thing?
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
And so that question leads itself to, this is why it's important, right, for us to be able to identify our budget priorities, because that's something that should be reflected in the budget, that we're going to be undertaking this during the next school year.
In the past, we've had in our budget, a space for any curriculum review that we do, of the option, the ability to both pay for it if we needed to, but also for the materials we might need and the professional development. So that would sort of be a line item. I think it's still there. I don't know.
And that's something, it's not still there, but that's something that we would like to see resurrected. So this year we managed to find the funds to do our ELA review, but next year we may be looking at additional curricular materials in ELA as a result of our review as well. So
Yeah, there's always a placeholder for that.
yeah, so that will be important, I think, as we undergo our budget discussions this year with the committee.
So I'm still hung up on the audit a little bit.
Okay, ask away. We have our expert here.
That's good. So it feels like we have a lot of this information or this data. Maybe there's some we don't have. So how long will it take and what year will we do it? What does it say there?
Scheduled for a year.
It would be for next year.
For next year,
And it ends at FY 2025.
okay.
So
Okay.
essentially what we would be
Yeah,
doing is,
yeah.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
I
So-
apologize. So essentially what we would be doing now is we'd be going out to bid and looking for a consultant team to kind of come in and choosing the right consultant team for the public schools of Brookline. And then in year one, we would go into it. Typically an audit takes between 3 and 4 months to actually complete the audit and then compile the report and then present to typically superintendent and the school committee.
So I guess just some thoughts is kind of like what we've talked about, the new initiative every 2 years, you know.
Mhm.
So it feels like we've had a lot of audits and reviews in the last couple of years. And so somehow I think we need to sell this as tying all those reviews together around equity so that it doesn't just feel like yet again, we're starting all over. And-
Right. And I think you're right. I think you make a really good point. I think what's challenging is that each curricular review picked up some things around equity, but it's not all tied together. I think what we want to do is have a consultant team come in and tie everything together in one. So everything is streamlined and it's not bits and pieces. And we're not trying to compile those pieces together.
I need a question there too. So when we're putting this together, where do you go if you want to look at what's been done in the past? Like how do we access that? Do you have access to, I guess, let me say it in a more generous way. Do you have access to what's happened in the past?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
all right.
So I think one of the differences, sorry, Dave, I think one of the differences is that this will look at equity broadly. I think equity has been a piece of lots of different things, and then our action plan has addressed all those different things and equity. this will really allow us to get down to some, and this is year 2 of this process, what's the root causes of those equity? That we haven't done. We haven't gotten down to what are the root causes of the equity issues that we're having, and what's a roadmap where we're going to focus on equity to get us there. And so I believe that this process will help us get there. So it's not even so much the audit itself that's important. I think it's what's happening in years 2 and 3 with that audit that is important, and how we use that information, and how it's almost a statement of value for us. We value equity so much that not only is it in every other curricular review that we do, we're also holding it out to be sure that we're really getting to the root causes of those things that we're seeing in our inequities in who's taking higher level math classes in 9th grade. Are students that are in our D level classes, are they accessing higher level classes and staying in those classes? Are we truly as inclusive as we think we are? And so I think really, and when we're not, why asking that question of ourselves, I think is important.
So just to make sure I'm understanding this correctly, because I worry the way that it's laid out, we won't be doing anything until 4 years from now.
No, that's the beauty.
Okay.
Great.
I think you're right. It does, I think that can be the perception based on what you see here.
With reading this, you don't see
yeah.
any benchmarks along the way. You
Right.
don't see anything else that's
right.
And I mean, there's work that's constantly happening as we're doing. I mean, we know this work that has already been done. I mean, Janae did a ton of work. Dr. Warnham did some work as well. We're continuing to do some of the work here. I think we need to lay that work out so people can actually see it. But the equity audit will allow us to do a really broad piece. And there'll be pieces that we're actually continuing to follow up on that as we're doing this. I think in year 2, really having a focus on the root cause analysis will really, really be helpful for us to really truly drill down. I think for a long time, we've been guessing as to why certain marginalized groups are not doing as well. I think we have some assumptions as to why. I think we've tried to address some things in the district with unleveling and things like that, but we're still not seeing the achievement of students. And so this will give us an opportunity to really drill that down.
one of the things I would hope that you would make sure is to include BEEP in this equity audit.
Absolutely.
Okay. I mean, because sometimes we forget about them because they're not as visible necessarily in the schools.
That's a good example of an area of our district that hasn't been covered by any of the previous reviews.
Right.
I mean, they do a good job.
Sure.
Oh, absolutely.
And, you know, in terms of stuff, but it just, I think it would be helpful. And to see kids who don't go through BEEP and kids who do is there.
So we know some of the what. We don't know the why. Is that what we're kind of saying?
That's, I think, what I'm hearing. Yes,
Yes.
we know what's happening. We know about those racial achievement gaps. But we don't necessarily know why. And I think we're trying to get at some of the symptoms of the why with the working group for the 8th to 9th grade transition. You know, I think we're making an assumption there that
Making several assumptions.
Yes.
And you want forward on those.
Yes.
So for instance, tier 1, strong tier 1 instruction, we're making the assumption, I think,
yes,
based on some kind of data that
absolutely.
that it needs to be stronger. Or
Right.
by making it stronger, it will help with this inequity stuff.
Yes.
I'm gonna have, okay, Michelle.
Well, I was just gonna
Stephen,
follow
and
up on what
Helen.
you're saying is that like a really clear connection. So complete the plan for providing PD around MTSS and the MTSS
Right.
thing. That is in direct response to the disproportionality because MTSS is one way that we look at supporting students, measured
Multi-tiered.
multi-tiered support systems. So without that in place, we're sending kids, we're identifying students for special ed evaluations when then we over-identify, especially, for example, what we've been called out on, but that's a direct link to data we actually have.
Yeah, and you're moving forward. on
We are
that. You're
moving
not gonna
forward
stop
with
it.
that.
I guess that's some of our fears.
Exactly.
You're gonna stop and wait
Exactly.
for the audit. Now we're
Yeah.
2 or 3 years out.
No,
Yeah.
so if we get that in place, those numbers should come down. We actually have something to measure very easily.
Stephen, did you have?
Yeah.
And then Helen.
So first of all, thanks for filling in so many of these gaps. This really helps me understand how you are all thinking about the next bunch of years. So a few thoughts. So first of all, on the very top, I'm struggling to fully align it with the goals that the school committee articulated. So the top 3 goals were joy in learning, excellence in teaching, and I think something like promotion of equity. So this is all in there, but I'm going through it in my head to see how is it in there? What is going to be achieved by the end of it? So starting with the first one, joy in learning, which is unpacked into mostly achievement, which, okay. It looks like that's going to be achieved mostly through curriculum. Is there more than curricular change that's going to promote joy in learning / achievement? I would think PD would be in there also, but PD is really focused on equity in this plan. So that's the first comment. The second comment is I think excellence in teaching deserves to be pulled out a little bit more explicitly as well. It's mostly focused around teacher evaluations. But I know when you presented to school committee, you talked about really powerful activities like teachers, communities of practice. So I know a lot of thought has gone into this, and I know Susan also talked about a learning academy, and that's not captured in here either. And then the third thought is there's a lot about equity in here, which I think is great, but I'm struggling with milestones related to equity. So I'm not sure what we're advancing towards. So, and in that, I think we really need to see targets and milestones relating to improvements in equity. Otherwise, I think we're in the dangerous space of not knowing how we're doing until we're almost done. So I'm really nervous about seeing a root cause analysis in year 2 of what's essentially a year 3 of essentially of a 4-year plan. So those are my reactions.
Thank you, Stephen. The PLC, the community of practice model, is in there. It's at the very bottom. Some of our slides.
I see
Yeah,
it, I see
so
it.
it's there.
I see it. I
And
missed it, sorry.
you know, these activities are all things that would be happening in the Learning Academy, as Suzanne
I wonder if it
Susan
could be
characterized
called out
it.
into a separate line where we could see it around excellence in teaching, so we could see the evolution of an activity related to that specific goal.
Okay, we could,
Because I think the school committee is going to need to look at how we're achieving the goals we set out for the district.
okay, thank you. That's good feedback. And I also just want to bring you to maybe next slide.
Okay.
So, go ahead, Gabe. Am I going back?
One quick thing, yeah, because I think,
Oh, I like these sort of numbers there. Go ahead.
yeah, I think there's words in here that are doing a lot of work, and maybe that work is invisible, right? So like implementing an equitable, cohesive, culturally relevant, standards-based curriculum, that's big, right? And maybe there's an assumption in there, but like implementing well, right? Like that requires a lot of the things that.
Where's that one?
At the very top, right? Increase achievement for students by establishing, implementing, and regularly assessing an equitable, cohesive, et cetera. Right, like
Right,
above
what-
the
what
above the
about
years.
In terms of the meat.
Standards-based curriculum in ELA,
At the very
writing,
top, Stephen.
Yeah,
math,
like,
not writing, math,
I think
science.
like the word implementing there requires a number of things, right? It requires training folks if there's new curriculum.
But that's the vision statement. I mean, right? Like
That's
that's
the
what
goal.
that's what has to align with the goals that this. To me, that's a little duplicative because that has to match up with existing goals.
Does it not?
What it does, and then some, and then it's on a bit of an angle too.
But it doesn't curriculum doesn't have to accomplish everything.
This is the whole strategic plan that we're looking at. We're
No.
not.
No.
This is just
I
going
take
on.
I
This
take
is just
it.
going on. Before I kept
I
going down
apologize. I
the
take
road,
it back.
I wanted you guys to
Everything
just
I
look
said
at
is
goal one.
not relevant to this conversation.
I did-
Moving on.
This is a lot of detail on goal one.
Yes.
Moving
Did you
on.
leave social studies out on purpose?
Yes.
More likely Jen instead.
Well, then what's happening?
All right, now,
And what, I imagine underneath each one of these, there are benchmarks for each year?
Yeah, well, these are the kind of the benchmarks.
Was that, but, okay,
Like,
or how you're gonna get to
yeah,
that?
how we're gonna get there. Did we do this? Did we do that? You know, I think we also have to remember that we have to honor the process that we went through to get to these goals. And this was where our community voice came in. This was our first goal, as well as when we were doing all of this work. But what I thought I was hearing from the committee around those measurables is what's going to be that impact on our students? What's going to be different as a result of us doing all this stuff?
Mhm.
And that's this slide. What we really are hoping to do, and this goes back to the point where we're not waiting till the equity audit is done before we start to expect a narrowing of the achievement gap for our students, based on race and income. And our measure that we're holding ourselves up to is how our white non-low income students are doing. And then we'll look at our other subgroups of students, very similar to what you did, Helen, with the report cards for the 2012. This is exactly the model that I'm thinking of
Right.
here. So you would have each subgroup.
And those made a difference, just so people know, at that time, it did make a difference in achievement. There was a small period of time when our achievement went up, for low income
Well, I'm
and
sorry, Helen,
minority.
what is it that made the difference?
Having those benchmarks, people all knowing that those were what we're working towards, it gave a framework for
report card.
everybody,
On
the report cards, yeah.
So was it like achieved, working towards or something?
It
like
was
that?
letter grades,
Maybe.
we actually gave ourselves letter grades at that time. It's this really.
Oh, that I remember.
Yeah.
this is year one, as in like not the foundational year. This is,
year.
okay,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. 10 out of 10 completed educator observations show evidence of implementation of or feedback towards that curriculum. So we're not just completing educator evaluation to complete, but we want to see if we grabbed 10 random observations, we wanted to see the things that we have in the goal in those observations.
We're helped by the state on this. So the state is currently piloting a new educator rubric that is supposed to go live next year that embeds equity through every single standard in the teacher rubric. So assuming we negotiate and adopt that rubric,
Hope it's good.
Um,
Hope it's good. We vet
that-
that. Let's vet that.
seriously,
Within
like,
what time period?
I mean, in theory, the state's intent is that we adopt that rubric for next academic year,
For September.
for September.
So it's gonna
Right.
come out this year? Is it-
It's
out.
in pilot
It's a
right now.
Yeah,
We'll
okay.
make revisions over the summer
Okay.
and then there'll be a release. That's what they've done
We're
historically.
not piloting.
We are not piloting now.
No. 'cause we haven't
Um,
negotiated
but
that contract.
the way that rubric is
No, no.
structured would allow our evaluators to very easily provide feedback. And so we could support our own community in this goal by adopting the new rubric. Which whole other conversation, but I think that's an example of where, again, actions don't have to wait for
Right.
a lot of other stuff. There are things in progress that help us.
And then the last one that we felt went with this at our child study team meetings. 85% of educators will identify at least 3 new strategies that they've implemented as a result of professional learning regarding multi-tiered systems of support. So that part of our child study team process will be teachers will have to say, oh, I got this idea from my PD on robust tier 1 instruction. I've implemented this already as we move forward or think about the child holistically. So these we thought would be good goals for the end of year one. And then they would, again, we would do this process for year two, but I didn't want to do that until I'm like, am I implementing and hearing correctly the feedback that I received from school committee on Thursday?
Yeah, well, this sounds. I think that I would be careful about using the word goals because the goals of the school committee, the goals of the strategic plan, it's too much.
Benchmarks.
Benchmarks would be, I think, a better, no?
No, I like the word benchmarks because you're reaching for it.
It's easy enough.
I mean, you're reaching for goals, but like you said, there's so many
But the
goals.
goals-
There's so many goals out there. What, so where does this land in the
This
place
is
of
telling us
goals?
whether we met the goal.
Yeah,
Yeah, I would also add that the audit's completed, because that's an activity in there.
Yep.
It's binary, but hey.
Yeah, and so thank you, Stephen. That's great. Like I was thinking that all of these two are also benchmarks,
Yeah.
right? Are we actually
Yeah.
doing, so the school committee will know, right? If we've completed the plan for providing PD around MTSS, right? That's something that I would expect the school committee to hold us accountable for and for seeing that plan. So I tried to write these in deliverables,
right.
and the other ones as the goals and the impact on students, while honoring all the community voice and not fundamentally changing what was in the plan.
You know, I also would just encourage to just know that these are ongoing, developing, you'll
Yes.
tweak them along the way. We'll never get to perfect.
No, it's a live document. It should be. It
Yes.
shouldn't be something that.
You know, maybe you try it and then you say, you've got to reboot.
Yeah.
What kind of look would you give me if I suggested moving the root cause analysis to the foundational year?
The year two root cause analysis?
Claire, what kind of look would you give me?
She hasn't put her glasses down yet.
Now.
I do that. I would say no.
Uh-huh.
I would say no. I think what is that we're looking at the outcomes from the audit. We could look at some of those, I believe, in the end of year one. But a real comprehensive root cause analysis will be happening in year two. But I think we could begin that at the end of year one. But we definitely can't do it in the foundational year. I think we have some pieces. I think we're making lots of assumptions. And so I'm actually a little afraid of trying to move that to foundational year.
Helen?
Yeah, just a suggestion, take it for what it's worth. But I'm wondering if we could do, and I'm not sure this is, I know we've never done it, do a baseline of kids who have graduated Brookline High 6 years out, where they are now. And then after we do all the work that we're gonna do, and this is really long-term, 6 years out, what is the difference?
Longitudinal study.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
was just gonna say.
exactly.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a great
Work.
Helen, you'll
Huh?
still be here, so.
No, I
Lead the charge.
No, but it's a wonderful thesis for a graduate.
Actually, 5 years to 5 years gives you students who, like, if you look at 5-year longitudinal data, you can watch what happens to students each year post-grad. It's actually just as impactful to continue that.
We could get some doctoral students.
Yeah.
Absolutely. They,
So I'm gonna do a time check.
oh, 5:35.
And so,
We're having fun.
well, no, I am too, yes, we are having fun, but I just want to make sure, I don't know how much more you have in this presentation.
It's these two slides for this
Okay,
piece.
okay, so then what, and then you're gonna.
Yeah, then I'm
So
gonna
we
talk
can-
about the conference.
We could talk about the conference transition, because that has to do with what's up here.
It does,
Yes.
actually,
It
it
does.
informed this.
Yes.
So,
So I don't want to cut this off, I just want to be
No,
aware of the
that's
time, so we're ready
Nice
to go.
facilitation.
Okay.
Can I just, I'm gonna make one more pitch.
Sure.
I feel like part of the difficulty that Janae had in the Office of Educational Equity is that she spent a lot of her time firefighting because there's always going to be a ton of issues coming up that demand the attention of the Office of Educational Equity. And I can't imagine that changing anytime in the future, Claire. So it's my hope that there would be some strategic plan that's really specific to the Office of Educational Equity that you'll have the time to create that can guide your office, that'll prevent you from getting sucked into the day-to-day firefighting that is going to attack your office as it always does, which is why I can't help fantasizing about moving some kind of strategic initiative to the shortest term. That's where I'm coming from. I'm thinking of how do I keep this current iteration of the Office of Educational Equity from the same cycle that has bedeviled previous iterations. So take that for what you will. You could discard it, but that's where my thinking goes right now.
No, I understand the thinking, and I don't totally disagree. I know that all of my predecessors were kind of hit with the, you carrying the fire hose to put out fires, and some of that will happen, and there'll be some of that work. But I think I'm very clear in trying to make sure that as we reimagine the Office of Educational Equity, that it really is about looking at the systemic work that we need to do to ensure that if educational equity is at the foundation of all the work that we do, that we stay focused on that. I'm excited that we look like we are in the process of hiring an assistant director. And so that will help with some of the work that we're going to do as well. But I do hear you. I think we have to try to get there somewhere in the middle, but we will continue to do the work and forge ahead.
Great. So here's a little bit of a fun picture. As you may or may not know, I had the pleasure of spending the beginning of the week last week in Florida with a group of about half of our principals, 5 principals. We went to Florida and attended a coaching conference. This is us at dinner at Disney Springs, all with our matching ears on, except for Mr. Ola, who decided that he did not want to wear his ears, but that was fine. We had this was at Disney Springs. Yeah,
Disney Springs.
The conference was actually at a hotel outside of the property. So we had a really great time, and I want to share with this committee a couple of.
Amy looks very happy.
Doesn't she?
I know her predilections.
A couple of the highlights that I personally got from the conference and things that we as a team are excited about. Monday was spent in a full day session. We each went to a different one, and I went to one on the SCARF model, which SCARF stands for status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And basically these are all threats. They're psychological threats for people. They can perceive a situation as threatening any of these areas. And some people are predisposed for some of these to be stronger threats, and it could interrupt how they do their work or how they approach their work. For example, I think my first week here, I kept saying to Suzanne, please don't fire me. That was an example of me expressing a status threat because I was very worried that I wasn't doing what I needed to do. And I was worried about my status. And what
certainty means?
Certainty means that you know what the outcome of a situation is. So if you're starting a project and you're not sure of what the outcome is going to be of that process, sometimes you can spin your wheels or get stuck, and we have to speak to the opposite of that, right? Like we have to give people as much certainty as we can about what outcomes are going to be for those of us that might have a certainty threat. autonomy, which is a very large Brookline word, right? We enjoy autonomy here very much. If people perceive something, for example, a curriculum initiative, a rubric for examining bias and materials that they bring in as a threat to that autonomy that they enjoy, they can shut down and they can remove themselves and they can bury themselves underground so that you don't get those results. So you have to find ways to still provide autonomy within what you do. Relatedness is how you relate to other people and your kind of your positionality with other people. And then fairness is, do you perceive this decision as fair or not? And if you feel that you're being treated unfairly, what will happen? And I got a whole bunch of strategies for counteracting each of these, as well as really getting to understand myself and which ones are particular triggers for me. And I think one of the important things that came from this is you wrap people in a scarf, you don't choke them. And how would you choke them with a scarf? Is you would really be disingenuous in how you try to counteract some of these threats and really either maternalistic or paternalistic in how you do it. That could end up as a choking situation and just exasperate all of these issues. So you want to wrap people in their scarf, not choke them in it. So this is something that we actually had started learning about. We're doing some work with the Massachusetts Association of School Superintendents with their READY network, which is Race, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Planning to get the acronym correct? Excellent, I got a nod. We as a team are doing some work with them around this, and SCARF was brought up. And I know Michelle and I have been using it a lot to really think about people's reactions to different things and why they might be reacting in a certain way. And it's really helpful for us to then frame our responses, thinking about that. In doing that, I turned it into a verb, like we scarf people. And they warned, not choke them. No, we don't choke them. And, you know, it came with a warning when we first learned about it. Don't do this to the people in your life, or at least obviously don't do it to people in your life. Be very subtle about it, or they might get that choking feeling. So this is something that I think you can look forward to hearing more from me, because it's something that I've really I've incorporated into my own practice. And then having spent a whole day diving deeply into this, I was really uncomfortable. I'm a natural introvert. I don't know if people realize that about me, but I am. I don't come off that way, but I'm very introverted. And we had to start. She gave us a picture of a brain with 8 different things that your brain can do. And you had to walk around the room and this massive international conference and find 8 people to sign your brain. And then she told us you would be talking to those 8 people, and the final 3 brain things, you would actually be coaching them, and they would be coaching you on a problem or practice, something that you felt stuck on and something you felt you had no control over. I was so uncomfortable for the first 45 minutes that I almost couldn't focus. But then our presenter was just so artful and wonderful in how she did it, that by the time we got to the coaching, it was the most natural thing in the world for me to be talking to a woman from Wisconsin about an issue that I was facing. It was great. And I got some great advice. So it was wonderful. So that's SCARF.
This conference you went to was sponsored by whom?
It was sponsored by Jim Knight, who's a preeminent author in the world of instructional coaching.
Oh, okay.
It was called the Learning Conference. And really, it was so beneficial, I think, for all of us, because it wasn't just about learning, it was about leading and about really how our brains function and about adult learning, that it was so fundamentally good. I think everybody walked away with something that they can use and apply in their practice right away, which is great.
He has a ton of videos, Helen, online, if you ever want to just.
Yeah.
It's okay, I'm not coaching anybody.
It's
But we are.
It's fabulous.
It was just good. And then on the end, at the middle of our last day, we had Zaretta Hammond, who is a renowned author. She wrote the book, The Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And so she's very into brain-based research. And these are a little askew because these are actually photos of the slides that I took while I was sitting in the session. So this talks about our journey into culturally responsive education, and that we start by waking up, and it's a call to joy and justice, right? As we start, there's that joy, Stephen.
That's how you wake up.
Well, you wake up to realize, wow, I have to do more about justice, and this work is joyful for us. And then you travel through this spiral, and some of it you start off in the known world, and then you get deeper into the uncertainty pieces of what happens, and then you fall into the learning pit. Love the learning pit, because I feel like sometimes I spend a lot of time in the learning pit. And this is how people change. So at first, you're demonstrating, and this is all based on brain research, you're demonstrating some incompetence, but you don't know. This is the what you when you don't know what you don't know phase of life, right? And then you start to wake up, and then that's your current reality, and you start to wake up, and you have the information, but I don't know what to do with it yet. And that's the learning pit, right? That's the dip. That's when you're consciously incompetent. You know that there's something missing, and you're aware of that. It's not quite the bliss of the conscious incompetence, because you know you have to do something with what you learn. And then you start to build your new normal. All right, there's some conscious competence. I know what to do. I'm practicing, I'm getting better. I'm closing the gap between what I know and my actions now. And then eventually you come out at the top, and you're now unconsciously just doing those things that you had learned about. They're just part of who you are and what you do. I love the learning bit. Cool. And it's really a great way to think about change and to think about how people change.
Yes, I'm really trying to think about, how you could be confronted with some data, and you're in an unconscious incompetence in a sense.
Well, it's almost like a child, who doesn't know how to read, then becomes aware there's reading, and then, begins to become, no? Am I?
Yeah, but I'm also thinking about adults. I mean, it's hard for us to admit we don't know something, though, that we're incompetent. I think that incompetence is a tough, tough word.
It is a tough word.
So, to say that 20% of my children aren't reading where I want them to be, that's tough stuff.
It is.
Right, and then to say, is that because of unconscious incompetence? That's a really tough pill to swallow.
It is, and it's requiring a lot, right? It's requiring a lot of the adult learner.
The only way you can get better is knowing what you don't know.
This happens to kids every day.
Yeah,
happens to kids every day, but not adults protect ourselves in a way so we don't have to face that.
But then we would stay in that current reality.
But this isn't the early childhood pedagogy.
Yeah.
There's like children play, and then they can learn. I mean, this is an adult pedagogy.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the way I see the
No, it's
distinction.
just the way I was forming it in my head.
Oh, I'm just saying, like, you don't have to tell a child you're incompetent for them to start to grow.
No, I do that either. Wait a minute. I
It's
was
gonna work to
saying.
tell a teacher. I mean, that's not what we're gonna say. They're not incompetent. They just are unaware or don't have the skill set.
But there's some teachers aren't aware either that they don't have.
No,
that.
that's what we're saying.
Oh,
Yeah.
I think if you shift the perspective to the recipient a little bit, right, the wake up call is a change in the standard.
Right.
Right? What it means to be competent has now changed. I'm going through my experience. I doing what I do. I probably feel generally good about it. Something interrupts me, right? Something tells me it's not going the way I thought it was,
Right.
or what it means to be very good is changed, right? Like literally the goalpost has moved, right? The rubric has changed. You know, as whatever it is, No Child Left Behind says you have to now have 100% performance, right? Like that was a change in the standard. And so then people are like, oh, I'm maybe not as good as I thought I was, right? And you have to make change and shift and change your practice, right? It is to some extent just learning, right? Because we tell people like, now you have to learn this, and you realize as soon as someone says that, oh, I don't know it, right? And sometimes I can imagine this being a very quick and small cycle, and sometimes it's really deep and really long, depending on what your wake-up call is.
I think it's not about like, I wasn't as good as I thought I did, but I got to do something differently. Like that's when I hit something where I'm like, oh, that is just not working. All right. But it's the motivation to figure it out.
This is where like the learning groups can really help, PLCs can really help, because you can bring that to the group, and it's not really about you personally, we hope. It's about what you bring, the data that you bring, the student learning that you bring, and the samples of looking at student work. That's where you can start to see where there are challenges, and maybe we have to figure out a different way. And it's not so hard if there's all of you saying, oh yeah, I could have figured that out. Or,
Right.
I have 20 kids as well. I mean, I have 20% of my kids as well.
And that's that conscious incompetence piece, right? So here are some great quotes that I
do have that first one.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, it's all
like
about that.
A pedagogy of compliance. Like when I think about what I used to a million years ago when I started teaching, or my boss thought was good teaching, was kids sitting in a row, well-behaved, quiet, exactly. And we still, in a large effect, judge a teacher by classroom management, not by how much the students are learning in the classroom. If the students are being compliant and engaging in activity, we're not necessarily looking at their learning, we're looking at their compliance. We have to change what that definition of engagement really means. To disrupt, this is my favorite, to disrupt oppressive systems, you must be willing first to disrupt yourself. Who
wants that?
And I think about my own journey, right? It is. It is. And disrupting means you have to rethink, reinvent, and reposition yourself. Where are you in your life? You have to rethink about that. And then you have to come out, right? As you come out of that learning pit, you have to reinvent yourself. You can't be the same person as you were when you went into the pit. You can't. That brain needs that gentle disequilibrium for you and learn. This is my other favorite quote. Curriculum is curriculum. All it is curriculum. How we use it rests in instruction. And that's that powerful piece. We can have the most highly rated curriculum ever. And if we're not using that curriculum appropriately, if our instruction is not what it should be, then it's just a curriculum. It's just, okay, we bought the best stuff. Our kids aren't necessarily getting the best education. And scaffoldings are a crutch. And she spent a lot of time talking about scaffolding and scaffolding learning and how we kind of forget one thing. A scaffold, when you see it on the outside of a building, is never meant to be permanent, right? It's a temporary structure, except in education. Sometimes we forget to take that scaffold down. And without taking that scaffold down for the students, we can never see if they're creating those new neural pathways that we were scaffolding for, because we just leave the scaffold up. And then eventually what happens is the scaffold will crumble and it won't be a lifelong lesson that the students take with them. It'll be something that has to be retaught because it only provides temporary access. And then prepare the dojo. So the dojo is really
What's a dojo?
the learning for. It's where you go to learn karate.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
There was something
And
there.
the reason she says to prepare the dojo is because of the way a dojo is set up. It has padding for when you make mistakes. It's a safe environment for students. There's support there for students. And she really created this analogy that was powerful for me, is that in order for education to be liberatory, we really need to think, you can see how excited I got at this, right? You really need to think about yourself as a personal trainer of the students' cognition, right? And of their cognitive development. You're developing their brains, you're their personal trainer, and you're getting them ready in your dojo. That's your classroom. That's what you're setting up. And you're creating that padding and that safe space for them. But I just thought this was so powerful, this analogy. It really worked for me. I don't know if it works for anybody else, but it really worked for me. Our entire team came out of the session ready to just do things differently next year. It was really transformative. It was so funny. We're out to dinner. We were still talking about it, we're like, yes, if we do this and we do this and take this from what she said, we'll be able to do great things. So
why wait till next year?
Well, because it requires a big shakeup that some of the little things we can do now, but some of the bigger things will be things that we'll be seeing in how we roll out PD and how we look at those things. So I'm really excited to do that. And so you can see a little piece of somebody's head.
Yeah, right.
In that picture. But I really want to thank the BEF for funding this trip, for the district for picking up the pieces that BEF didn't fund or was unable to fund. It was really illuminating for all of us. And it was also a great chance for me, being a new person here, to get to spend some quality time with our principals as well. I don't want to downplay that there was a nice social aspect of it as well, where we could really bond as a team. So that was my week last week.
Right on time.
Right on time.
So
Yes, thanks to you.
this is such a gift.
Yes.
That we can sit here and chat about these things in a way that doesn't really happen in big school. Thank you so much. I know you're not feeling well.
Thank you.
We've got a bunch of people with colds.
Yeah, it's not a cold, actually. I've had it for 2 weeks, so I don't have COVID.
It's okay. We've run out of time.
Yes.
I'm going to be respectful of people's times.
Thank you.
Okay, any last words that people want to say? I do want to really thank you and your team really for
Thank you.
covered a lot of ground today.
Huge. The
new business question, did we make a selection for the ELA contractor?
We did.
Who was it?
The Hill.
I'm sorry, who and what?
We're doing an ELA review, and I had asked Stephen for his expertise on choosing who, evaluating the proposals. And the Hill for Literacy, that's their name, it was by far, it was almost unanimous, the successful awardee. And I spoke with them actually today. They're coming in under budget. We opened up the bid money that was also something that was really exciting for us. And
What grades?
they were able, excuse me,
What grades?
it's K through 12. And they were able to answer my questions about the secondary piece to my satisfaction, because we were a little worried that they were elementary skewed, but they're doing some great secondary work in Fall River and someplace else.
Local?
Yes, yeah.
They were really strong. I really was impressed by their offer.
Okay. And when did they start?
TBD.
So just so I understand, they're gonna be evaluating what we have
Yes,
or what.
Yeah.
Melange or whatever, what everybody's teaching. And then what are they gonna do with
then
it?
they're gonna make recommendations.
Uh-huh.
And then they really have this nice scaffolded model, but they removed their scaffolding where they really position teachers as leaders in this work. And they create these literacy leadership teams for the district. And they really help scaffold that and do a gradual release of responsibility so that eventually we don't need consultants anymore. We have the literacy muscles that we need. They
So
bring us.
they evaluate and then they help you to come to a new.
Yeah.
Curriculum, okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Over how many years?
2 to 3. So they'll evaluate
But this
this year.
contract is just for.
Yeah, this contract is just for a few months. It's just for this year. And then if we choose to go with them, that'll be a topic for discussion.
That's huge.
Yeah.
The contract is just through January if with a period of performance
Yes.
pushed forward, but.
And we might skew that because we open the bids late and all that fun stuff. So
It's exciting.
it is exciting. Lots of exciting stuff happening in teaching and learning.
That's a great deal. That's great. Thanks for making that happen.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's it. That's it. I think we're done.